in day 77, just to recap, in that day, we've moved from talking about the 18 qualities of a perfect human rebirth to talking about what, now that we have a perfect human rebirth, how do we utilize it, or what is the best way to utilize it? And Lama Zopa pointed out in the previous contemplation that we can use this rebirth to create whatever karmic causes and conditions we want for the future. But then on day 78, he kind of gives us more instruction about that. He says, yes, we have the choices up to us about if we want to aim for an upper realm rebirth, in the formless realm, we can create the formless absorptions and, become a formless being, and so on. But in day 78, he says anything less than complete and perfect enlightenment for the sake of all kind mother sentient beings is unworthy of this amazing life we have. So he's trying to give us more direction about, although it's true that we can create any karmic causes and conditions for whatever kind of rebirth comes next. And that's also, we talked about how it's not, we talked about how in the Foundation of All Good Qualities, Lama's Tsongkhapa's glance meditation on the Lamrim, he describes this stanza is described by saying that this life comes only once, but then is difficult to find again. And we said how those two things can't be true. And so that's what he's kind of getting at here, is that although it's difficult to create those causes and conditions with a perfect human rebirth, it's certainly possible. It's certainly well within the realm of what's reasonable, what is possible. Whereas to create those causes and conditions with any other kind of rebirth is essentially, almost impossible. But because we have a perfect human rebirth, the opportunity to amass those causes and conditions again exists. But what he's suggesting, he says, the greatest meaning is the opportunity we have to attain full enlightenment. And that is based on, in a way, the previous contemplation of guru devotion, where not only do we have, we've been born at a time and a place where the teachings exist, where we have the ability to understand and practice the teachings. The teachings are a living tradition, but we've met the Mahayana virtuous friend. We've met someone, His Holiness or Lama Zopa, or someone in the world who's capable of revealing that path specifically to us. They act in the world as a living example of how to engage in the path and how to get the result of the path. And that's really the key ingredient. So here we can kind of link the first contemplation on guru devotion to the second contemplation on perfect human rebirth by pointing out that really it's the Mahayana virtuous friend, the guru, that enables us to take the essence of this life and use it in the best way to achieve full enlightenment. And of course, as he points out here, the motivation in the Tibetan tradition, the Mahayana tradition generally, for wanting to do that isn't because it protects oneself from suffering, but because it permits oneself to protect all other sentient beings from suffering. And he brings in the contemplation, which is a great scope contemplation, but the contemplation on seeing all sentient beings as having been one's mother. Kind mother sentient beings is the common phrase, and that is meant to be literally a true statement that every sentient being has played the role of the mother in past lives, countless past lives, has raised us, has given up their lives for us, has fed us from their body, has protected us from the elements, taught us, raised us, and so on. And we've talked about in other classes how that status doesn't um, doesn't cease at death. Even for our own mother in this life, if our mother in this life has passed, or if they will pass before we do, then still, when we look at a photograph of our mother, we say, that's my mother. That's a picture of my mother. We don't say that's a picture of someone who used to be my mother, or we say that's just a picture of my mother, even if they're no longer living. So it's still true that every sentient being has been one's mother, and you can say, that's my mother, because yes, that lifetime in which they actually had that role, they've passed away from that lifetime, but the passing away from that lifetime doesn't alter that was in fact true. Um, so he brings in the contemplation on bodhicitta, and one of the entryways into bodhicitta, developing bodhicitta, is the recognition that all sentient beings have been my mother, countless times in past lives, and therefore, due to that kindness, we're motivated to repay that kindness, and the only way that we can truly repay that kindness is to achieve enlightenment, to protect them from suffering, just like we would be motivated to protect them from danger that we observe, kind of more conventional dangers, fires, floods, sickness. The ultimate kind of protection is leading them to enlightenment so that they never suffer ever again, and they're not subject to suffering ever again. Um, so he's asserting, um, that of the possibilities that we could use this life for, that is the one that is worthy of the kind of life that we possess. If it would be a shame, he's asserting it would be a shame, which again is something that we just have to contemplate. No one's saying that we must accept Lama Zopa's assertion, but we need to contemplate it and see what we think. But he's asserting that if we used a perfect human rebirth to, again, become a form realm God, a formless realm God, what have you, very little ultimate benefit in that. So he says all it takes from our side, because we have all of the causes and conditions that are external. All it takes from our side is the determination to take that path, that road, and using the techniques taught in Vajrayana with bodhicitta motivation, we can reach the end of that road very quickly without having to wait the eons it would take following the Sutrayana path. Um, So, so that gets at, kind of this idea that many people may be to some degree familiar with, that that the Buddha, the historical Buddha, it said that it took three countless great eons for the Buddha to achieve enlightenment before he practiced. The understanding in Tibetan Buddhism is actually that that even a Sutrayana practitioner ultimately has to practice Vajrayana, that there actually isn't a purely sutric path to enlightenment, but that you can practice Sutrayana for incredibly long periods of time, um, to amass but then still in your last lifetime there has to be some Vajrayana practice. But like I said, that was kind of the path that the historical Buddha showed, which took three countless great eons. And my teacher said that that's kind of that's the number that we see most often in the sutras, and that's the number that. But that's not like the upper limit. It's not the low. My teacher said that's sort of like the average, sort of the arithmetic mean of that kind of approach to enlightenment is about three countless great eons. So it would take some practitioners much longer, and some practitioners, maybe one countless great eon or two countless great eons. And a countless great eon is the amount of time that it takes for a universe to be born, to abide, and to dissolve, to dissipate. So trillions of Earth years is one countless great eon. And it took three of those um, for the Buddha to achieve enlightenment. But the other option is to put more effort into first becoming, if you look at the foundation of all good qualities, Lama Tsongkhapa says, having become a pure vessel, having become suitable to practice Vajrayana, then please bless me to enter the holy gateway of the fortunate ones. So of course we need to, so from what people, what teachers have said that I've picked up on, the emphasis, isn't necessarily to just think that we ought to rush into just actual Vajrayana practice, but we need to focus on becoming a pure vessel, really mastering the Lamrim, and subduing the mind, and then practicing Vajrayana. Of course, there's different points of view on that. Different traditions have some different points of view, but the Lamrim exists to prepare the mind for Vajrayana practice, to create the causes and conditions for Vajrayana practice to be really effective. Because renunciation, some people think that renunciation isn't necessary if you're practicing Vajrayana, and that's a false understanding. A Vajrayana practitioner needs a greater degree of renunciation, because they are using energies that without the right context won't serve that purpose, won't serve the purpose of enlightenment, and can take them away from that goal. So they need to be more skillful and more, have greater renunciation, so that they don't get caught up in what they're doing and it takes them actually away from that goal. But it's said that a sincere, genuine Vajrayana practitioner, who is really keeping the vows and the commitments and all of that very purely, would achieve enlightenment within 14 lifetimes. That's kind of the upper limit, for a genuine, sincere, dedicated Vajrayana practitioner. So 14 lifetimes compared to three countless great eons, certainly it's a much better process, a much faster. The diamond vehicle, the lightning vehicle, it's a much better way to go about it. But we have to be really, really skillful in creating the causes and the conditions to do that well, and not just think, oh, well, that just means I can ignore the Sutrayana, I can just throw that away and just take some initiation and then just start doing generation stage, and then that's sufficient, because without all of the Sutrayana realizations, without bodhicitta, without renunciation, without guru devotion, without it doesn't mean anything. It won't accomplish anything. So, any thoughts or questions? There's no wonder in that. Mhm.
Do most Mahayana practitioners take Vajrayana vows at some point?
So the question from the so I'll get to you in a second, Aaron. But I beat you to the punch here. So the question from the Gompa is, do most Mahayana practitioners take?
This meeting is being recorded.
Sorry, I got too excited, I guess. I apologize. So, of course, when we say Mahayana itself does apply to unrelated Buddhist traditions like Zen and so on, and they don't have Vajrayana in. But within Tibetan Buddhism, it's a very personal thing. I can't, I think um, it seems really. I think now it's probably much more commonplace than it was 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. It was really restricted much more back then. Um, but I think, I mean, that's kind of the thing you have to work out with the teacher. It's like, am I ready? Because I mean, if we go by the historical standards, then very, very, very few of us will be ready in this lifetime, because it was really restricted. It was restricted to just the most extraordinary practitioners. And now it's really widely available because the gurus see the value in just getting some imprints of that practice, even if we're not actually going to achieve enlightenment in this lifetime. There's still some value in imprints from at least generation stage. Um, but it's, there's a unique set of vows that we need to take very seriously at that stage. So, and you can't study them before, unlike lay vows or bodhisattva vows or one day vows. All of those you can study prior to taking them and being like, oh, okay, the holy day is coming up. Should I take the 8 precepts? Can I keep the 8 precepts well? And so, like, well, you read the 8 precepts and then you decide, yes, I can keep these for one day, or no, I don't think I can. So then you wouldn't take them, or, well, you could decide. Um, Whereas the tantric vows you can't study until you've taken them. So it's sort of a leap of faith at that point. So it's a very personal thing that, kind of your teacher has to help you navigate. Aaron, you have a question.
My question was, where is the Pure Lands then in the whole system? Like, is it something like the Jushin no Judo, where it's like it's a mind only thing, and reality you are doing the tantras, but it's like a pure mind, therefore that is the Pure Land?
Well, so I mean, he says in this contemplation, Lama Zopa is saying that achieving enlightenment is the best thing that we can do. So it is. There are pure lands. There are some pure lands. There are some pure lands without tantric teachings, and there are some pure lands with tantric teachings, or where the tantric teachings are available. So, but I can't. Because we kind of looked at this before in my, it's such a technical point that I don't know how helpful I can be on that, other than to say that it is an option. It isn't a mistaken view to aspire to achieve enlightenment in a pure land where tantric teachings are available. That is one route. Another route is in human form, to just literally, because you can literally, even in one lifetime, they say, you can, and by one lifetime they mean that you've never practiced tantra before. You've probably never even practiced Buddhism before. That's what they literally mean by one lifetime. The Vajrayana teachings are so powerful that it can be, even in a single lifetime, in human form, a person goes all the way to full enlightenment. It can also happen in the intermediate state. It can happen at death. It can happen. A person can be a Vajrayana practitioner and get a high degree of control over the energies of the body. And then during the death process, when the mind of clear light arises, as it arises naturally for anyone, whether they're a practitioner or not, the mind of clear light arises at death. And a person who's prepared for that, having practiced, can use that opportunity to achieve enlightenment. Because the whole purpose of Vajrayana is to safely cause the mind of clear light to arise in meditation, in your normal daily existence, to just enter a session of meditation and be able to cause the mind of clear light to arise, and then to absorb the winds into the mind of clear light, and so on. So that is something that happens to all of us at death, but it happens very quickly, and we pass through it, and then we, the mind becomes very subtle, and the winds absorb, and the mind of clear light arises. But then in the next moment, that changes, and the mind becomes coarse again, and then we enter the intermediate state, and we take rebirth. But a highly advanced practitioner can hold the mind in the mind of clear light and practice and either achieve enlightenment right then, or if not, they create incredibly powerful imprints by concentrating the mind on wisdom, realizing emptiness, while absorbed in the mind of clear light at death. And then they have effectively really sped up their process, even if they then take rebirth. They may see emptiness directly at that time, or they just may create these really incredible imprints in the mind that will shorten their path to full enlightenment. But yes, certainly taking rebirth in a pure land where tantric teachings exist is one method whereby enlightenment could be the result. But Lama Zopa always, emphasizes that we should always qualify praying to be reborn in a pure land to a pure land that has tantric teachings, and not because there are pure lands that don't. I don't know. I couldn't give you a list of the two divisions, but there are, But it seems like Lama Zopa is suggesting that even just qualifying it in that way, dedicating it in that way, is sufficient. Like if you say a pure land where the tantric teachings exist, that qualification in terms of a dedication, in terms of a prayer, karmically speaking, maybe that's sufficient. You don't have to actually, because the karma will just ripen as it's directed like that. Any other questions? And of course, like I said, you that's also something that could be looked at with one's teacher, like what practices, because that in a way, most of the time, I mean, being reborn in a pure land is not a random thing. You create the causes and the conditions by practicing that deity. So that's the kind of thing also, like what practices are best for one person is really something to work out, with a teacher.
Venerable.
Mm-hmm.
I get the sense, and correct me please, I get the sense that it's preferable to make a concerted effort, or to be to have a purpose to be reborn as in the human realm, in order to develop bodhicitta. That's not possible in the God realm, or in a pure land. Is that correct, or am I just pulling that one out?
Well, so the purpose of or the motivation for wanting to achieve enlightenment is definitely should be bodhicitta. Um, the purpose of wanting to accomplish the result of the path of full enlightenment, that should definitely be bodhicitta eventually, because again, that's a great scope motivation. So we do need to master the small scope. We need to master the intermediate scope, the middle scope. It's a great, it's objectively a great scope motivation. So we can't just skip the small scope or the middle scope, but we want to get to the great scope. We want that ultimately to become our genuine motivation. But it does depend on creating the causes and the conditions for that to genuinely be true on the basis of mastering the small scope and the middle scope. But if we've determined that a Pure Land rebirth is maybe the best vehicle to get that result, then still that's why we're doing it. That the result is not like where we're going to be doing it, but when we do it, why did we do it? So there's, I mean, potentially you could make the argument, because of course, you find people, practitioners, like we've said before, that make prayer to be reborn in hell. They're not praying to be reborn in a Pure Land, they're praying to be reborn in hell. Because that's where they see suffering, that's where they see the greatest suffering, and they want to, and that kind of incredibly pure karma does have immense power to bring benefit. So yeah, it's a, sort of a subtle point, but ultimately what we want to focus on is why we're achieving that result. And so I can't say exactly if it matters so much where, you know, how we do it, or we should just, again, kind of the thing that we should maybe talk with our teacher about and figure out, like, for me, like, what's the best vehicle, what's the best method. But the emphasis should be on, when I get that result, why do I want to get that result? What am I going to do with it? I'm going to be able to benefit sentient beings limitlessly forever, having accomplished that result.
Thank you. So I'm understanding that really your motivation, your bodhicitta motivation is most important, no matter where you direct yourself.
Yeah. I mean, if the safest kind of thing, if we feel like, well, being protected in the Pure Lands and having, being able to take teachings from Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and that, I mean, that certainly, there's many prayers that, where that's asserted to be, a good way to go. But then we think, well, the only reason that I want any of that is because the end result gives me incredible capacity to be of benefit. And if I don't achieve that, then I won't have that capacity to be of benefit.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Just a question of what you were just saying. In my mind, the bodhicitta path and internal soul satisfaction are kind of one and the same, so that you achieve, a level of joy by following the bodhicitta path. I mean, they're not
Mm-hmm.
exclusive.
Right.
Don't give up things.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. Yeah, so the question from the Gompa, or the observation from the Gompa, is that we actually do accomplish our own purpose by following the bodhicitta motivation, that there's nothing left out for one's own benefit, that and that's absolutely true. But we just don't focus on that. It happens by the by. It happens as a consequence of achieving enlightenment. It also happens that all of our own highest good is accomplished. Um, but it's also true. I mean, you could make the argument too that those who achieve lower nirvana aren't really missing anything um, related to that. They have the subtle obscurations to omniscience, but they're not having a bad time. They're it's quite a blissful, free of suffering kind of state. They're not able to emanate back into cyclic existence for the benefit of sin. So that's kind of the danger, is that if we don't if we don't intentionally think about the difference between those two states, um, and the benefit, because the benefit that comes from being able to emanate back into cyclic existence is of no value to oneself. That is only of value to all other sentient beings. So if we get to the point where, like, oh well, this seems, lower nirvana seems easier, it seems faster, it seems less complicated, I don't have to worry about bodhicitta, I don't, actually cultivating bodhicitta, 7 point cause and effect, or equalizing and exchanging self-cherishing for other cherishing, the actual, like, meditative realization of bodhicitta. We can kind of just like, oh, I'd rather let that go, that's the danger, is that we kind of just go down that route. But certainly it is true that there isn't any real self-sacrifice that is happening with that. Um, yeah, yeah. Any other questions? So going along with that, on day 79, Lama Zopa says, if extracting the essence from our perfect human rebirth means practicing Dharma, then striving to attain bodhicitta and enlightenment is the heart of the essence. So here he's saying, so there's sort of these last three contemplations are sort of progressively focusing our mind. First, we established that this opportunity can go in lots of, seemingly useful directions. But then he said, among those, enlightenment is the greatest, the highest. And now he's saying, once we've identified that that's true, then we should really devote ourselves without wasting time, without, really every moment trying to transform every action of body, speech, and mind into the cause for enlightenment, by recollecting bodhicitta, by at least, because of course, like I said, there's sort of the prayer of bodhicitta, there's the, we can think, may I achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, um, which is good. And then there's, of course, the meditative realization of bodhicitta, which depends on renunciation, depends upon great love and great compassion, and where bodhicitta actually becomes one's internalized sort of baseline state of being. But the prayer, is quite wonderful, to just say the words, to kind of get some feeling by putting the mind, directing the mind, even just aspiring, just thinking, how wonderful enlightenment is, because the beings who achieve it have the capacity to emanate into cyclic existence, to like His Holiness, thinking of His Holiness as an emanation, you know, of Chenrezig, and and thinking how extraordinary that is, and just aspiring to be like that is quite wonderful. He says every action we do with bodhicitta motivation helps us fulfill our ultimate potential of enlightenment. If it were form, the merit we create by the charity of giving with bodhicitta a crumb of food to an ant would encompass the whole of space. Because of course they say that the mind of an enlightened being pervades all of space. That it's limitless. They say that bodhicitta. They talk about like people talk about like, well, am I attached to my practice? Because we talk about attachment as exaggerating the pleasant or the beneficial or useful qualities of something, and then not wanting to be separated from it. And people think, well, do I have attachment for my practice because I don't want to be separate? I don't want to give up this life and not be able to practice, or they get fear or anxiety over that. But what they say is that you can't exaggerate enlightenment. You can't, that the benefits of it are so extraordinary that no matter what your mental conception is, it's less than what's true. It's less than the actual benefit of accomplishing that state. So he says if we could really understand how precious our life is, we would never think about wasting even a second. And the thought of using it for even a moment's non-virtue would feel like a greater loss than having thrown a bag of diamonds away. Like we talked about before, having, a credit card with a, limitless amount, and kind of this same sort of thing, where we have an intuitive understanding of the value of money, but we don't have an intuitive understanding of the value of using this life to create the karmic causes and conditions for achieving enlightenment. And that's what this contemplation is doing. It's trying to give us that intuitive understanding by repetition, con- you know, contemplating over and over again these points. Just like we've spent decades contemplating what I would do if I won the lottery, what I would do if, we've thought about that probably a couple of times a week, every week for the last 30, 40 years. And if we start thinking about this 4 or 5 times a week in 30 years, we'll be an incredible practitioner. We'll develop that intuitive sense of the value of this life. Any thoughts or questions? So maybe the last contemplation for today. I don't know if we're ending on well, maybe we don't have a choice. Try not to end on kind of a difficult point, but he's getting into the section, because we talked about the sections of this contemplation, and how one of them is the difficulty and rarity of a perfect human rebirth. And that's kind of the section that we're on now, because we need to create that sense of resolve, that sense of actually, once again, creating the causes and conditions to achieve yet another perfect human rebirth. Using this life in that way. So on day 80, the contemplation is the causes of this perfect human rebirth are incredibly difficult to create. He says that is the most basic fact about karma, that without creating the cause, the result cannot happen. We have created the causes for this perfect human rebirth. So now we're enjoying the fruit of that. But realizing how incredibly difficult it is to acquire such causes makes us appreciate the hard work that we did in the past and generate the determination not to waste it now. And then he reiterates again what we've said, that those karmic causes are morality, generosity, and stainless prayers. And here he qualifies stainless prayers to receive a perfect human rebirth in the future in order to benefit others. So in our and here he introduces an important concept in Buddhism that like Venerable Rubina often talks about, where it's the vehicle that we use for morality are vows, and how that's something that is a really powerful vehicle that we can employ to get that result. So there, as I said, there are the lay vows, the one-day vows, there's the bodhisattva vows, there are the tantric vows, there's the vows of a monk or a nun, and that has two levels, fully ordained and novice ordination vows. So there's all of these different levels of vows, and there's certainly in Buddhism the understanding that taking advantage of that as a vehicle is even more powerful than just trying to observe morality outside of that vehicle. So what I mean is the understanding there, like if we take the lay vows, not to kill, not to steal, not to lie, not to commit sexual misconduct, not to take intoxicants, then a person could, those are not odd ideas. They're not ideas that don't kind of just generally exist as, we would kind of generally agree that those are, broadly speaking, the things that people who want to be ethical kind of do. But what Buddhism would point out is that there's a difference between just thinking that not killing is good versus taking the vow not to kill and kind of saying, I am a person who does not kill, and I actually have a training not to kill, because the difference is, karmically speaking, that if we just try not to kill, if we just kind of see the value in not killing, then it's only when we are presented with an opportunity to kill and we choose not to kill that we get any benefit from that kind of idea in the mind, from that sort of perspective that we might adopt. We might adopt the perspective that killing is bad and just kind of leave it at that. And that's great. But the karmic benefit of that only occurs when we're when there's a sentient being in front of us that we think, oh, I could kill or I couldn't kill. I don't want to kill it, and so I'm not going to kill it. Then there's benefit at that moment. But if you take a vow not to kill, then even when there's no opportunity that's presenting itself to engage in the karma of killing, you're still receiving the benefit of that vow. Now, if you take a vow and then you're presented with an opportunity and you break the vow, that's not good. Like you still have to, when the opportunity presents itself, you still have to uphold that vow. But the difference is, karmically speaking, there's benefit to the mind even outside of opportunities to actually choose whether or not to engage in that action, because you have said, you've kind of pledged, you've committed, um, that you are a person who does not kill. Um, but then of course, with respect to the lay vows and so on, we are going to make mistakes. We are going to kill a fly, kill a cockroach, kill a mosquito. We are going to tell, we're going to feel really threatened by something that we did that we want to hide, so we tell, we fib about something. We are going to make mistakes with the training precepts, and so so it isn't to freak out about that. We just try to recognize that it was a mistake, it wasn't in keeping with the vows that we took, and then we try to purify that mistaken action. We engage in Vajrasattva 35 confession, but we do something that purifies that negativity, because we understand that it isn't in keeping with what we want, that we willingly took vows as a vehicle to develop the mind, and then we made a mistake because of our habituation to self-cherishing, and so we don't beat ourselves up, but we recognize that it was a mistake and we purify the mistake, and then we move on. Then we make we redouble our efforts to avoid that mistake. But taking, availing ourselves of those skillful vehicles of the lay vows, bodhisattva vows, one day vows, those are really powerful karmic method for this kind of morality that's specifically being addressed here. Um, yeah. Yep. Okay. Any thoughts or questions? Yes, Aaron.
How does that work? I've heard that the vows also work differently in relation to ethics. So how does that work in that case?
Can you say the question in a different way?
Sure. So my understanding is that the above, like the bodhisattva vows, are often compared to like they're more like a lightweight metal. They can be shifted a little bit. They get damaged, you break them, and they can be repaired. And I've heard that like the tantric vows are very similar in that sense. That is, they're very like they hurt you really bad if you mess them up, but then you can repair them and you can produce a lot more because they're very good at producing merit. But they also have a different relationship to ethics that's also looser, just like that heightened level of fluidity, just like the bodhisattva is a little more fluid as well.
Yeah. So if a person holds multiple sets of vows, so of course, in one way, what you're saying is that the vows become more subtle. The different levels of vows, the individual liberation vows, the lay vows, they're the coarsest, kind of most black and white. Kind of, either you're telling a lie or you're not telling a lie, either you're killing or you're not killing. Like it's pretty clear cut. Um, and then the bodhisattva vows become more subtle. They become more mental. It's they're harder in a way. They're also, as you're saying, they become harder to keep. And then the tantric vows, so then like there was I forget exactly who the quote is attributable to, but there's one great practitioner where he was saying, he had all three sets of vows, and maybe even ordination vows. I'm not sure, but he was saying that like he could get to a point where he never broke the lay vows. He never killed, he never stole, he never lied, but he like pretty often, like several times a week, he would do something that transgressed his bodhisattva vows because they're subtler, they're more difficult. And then he was saying that the way that he would break his tantric vows, that those downfalls were like rain. It was all day, every day, because you have to uphold pure view and clear appearance, and like it's so subtle that technically speaking, he was breaking those all of the time. So that's one aspect, and that's true. And then the key, as you're saying, the key is to not be really freaked out about it, about that, how that's true. But the key is to aspire, to just do better. The key is to purify. The key is to to really learn the vows deeply, understand them deeply, study them deeply, and then because you can retake when you do the Guru Puja, you retake the Bodhisattva vows, you retake the Tantric vows. So if you do the Guru Puja every day, which is a reason why people who are kind of advanced, like that's how they hold their practice together, is the Guru Puja, because there's methods. But you could just, do, I mean, if once you've taken them, you could just do those sections. That's, it's an option. So whereas it is true that you can't retake the individual liberation vows apart from a teacher, if you break them from the root. If you completely, you have to retake them from a teacher. So there's differences like that. And then it's also true that if they are in conflict, then you're meant to uphold the highest level of vow. So if if in order to uphold a bodhisattva vow you have to lie, then you're obligated to tell a lie to uphold the bodhisattva vow. If by telling the truth you would break the bodhisattva vow, you shouldn't tell the truth. You should uphold the bodhisattva vow. So that they're ranked in that sense too. Yeah, but that that of course requires a lot of skill, a lot of hopefully wisdom, to not make a mistake about understanding this or that. So again, I think having a teacher help you to navigate, not you, but having a teacher to navigate, like if you feel like there's a conflict, kind of trying to work that out in a really skillful way isn't always easy. Was that helpful, or was that kind of related to what you were asking?
I know, because I was thinking of like how ethics works at that level then. Like, because ethics obviously produces merit or damages our ability to produce merit. We produce vices. And I was wondering how it works at that fine level.
I mean, I don't know that I think it, because it's also a refinement of our motivation, because when you become, it depends on a person's level of meditative realization and all kinds. I mean, there's all kinds of things, because we can take the bodhisattva vow without being a bodhisattva, but a bodhisattva, but then there's bodhisattvas who are upholding the bodhisattva vow. And we can take the tantric vows without really being a tantric practitioner. We're just kind of pretending that, so I think it depends on a person's actual level of realization. I think that's a key element in the whole process it, because then that depends on how much wisdom they truly have and how skillful they truly are. But maybe generally speaking, the individual liberation, because the individual liberation vows are shared with Theravada practitioners. They're not unique. The Bodhisattva vows become unique to. So I mean, they say you can take the individual liberation vows because that's why they're called individual liberation vows. They're not unique to Mahayana, whereas Bodhisattva is unique to Mahayana. But then with Vajrayana, you're actually, because a bodhisattva could still be someone who's using the sutric path. So what's unique about Vajrayana is you're abandoning the sutra path and you're saying, I will in this very lifetime, I will achieve enlightenment for the benefit of sentient beings. So you're refining the urgency of your motivation, the depth of your motivation. And so there's that kind of level of refinement with the vows in terms of one's actual motivation for taking them and why they're being taken. But I do think it depends upon meditative realization and that sort of thing too. But we're a little bit past time. Sure, yes, of course. Yeah, so we're a little bit past time. Is there a final question or thought? Nope. So we'll just dedicate then. So recollect your altruistic motivation and think that having studied and listened and participated, you've actualized that motivation, created positive energy in the mind, and have a sense of offering the fruit of your practice for the benefit of countless sentient beings without exception. And just visualizing it ripening in incredibly vast, beneficial ways, sending healing and protection to those affected by the devastation of the earthquake, those in the intermediate state, visualizing that they instantly achieve a perfect human rebirth and practice the path and achieve enlightenment as quickly as possible. And thinking that the minds of all sentient beings in all 6 realms are purified and protected. And all sentient beings are guided and protected by enlightened beings. They all swiftly achieve enlightenment as quickly as possible. Just visualizing that incredibly vast benefit of one's practice. All right. Today's Thursday, so we'll meet again on Monday.